Welcome to a special episode of the Ivey Academy Presents Learning in Action, your source for insights, research, and expert advice on critical issues in business. In this episode, we explore some of the fascinating research led by the team at Innovation North, one of Ivey's leading knowledge centers. We'll introduce you to the Innovation North Compass framework and take a look at its real-world applications for Walmart Canada, a longtime collaborator and practice partner of Innovation North. Today we're joined by two special guests. I'm pleased to introduce Tima Bansal, Professor of Strategy and Sustainability at Ivey Business School and the founder of Innovation North. Tima's work focuses on reimagining business innovation to foster resilient and sustainable societies. Tima's joined by Colton Schwenk, Innovation Product Manager at Walmart Canada. Colt's diverse background spans health systems research, naturopathic medicine, and corporate innovation. In his work with Walmart, Colt leads the development of products and projects that merge strategic focus and creative ambiguity. Let's get started.
Sean, hello everybody. I'm very excited to be able to talk to you about what we're doing at Innovation North, and even more excited that I have my colleague and practice partner, Colton Schwenk from Walmart, joining me in illustrating how systems thinking can come to life. I have a slideshow that I would like to share with you. The agenda is I want to speak a little bit about systems innovation, and then Colt's going to tell you about a challenge, a specific challenge that retailers like Walmart face, and then we will apply that challenge to the compass itself. So get to understand systems innovation, you will understand what it means to apply the compass, a tool, in solving a very specific problem. So let's get started. When you think about approaches to innovation, there's three primary approaches. It's the one that you often think about in terms of breakthrough thinking. This is what we see at Silicon Valley. You probably know it as move fast and break things. And it leads to this orientation to spend a lot of money to solve a very specific problem. And it happens often with platform technologies and areas in which there's a race to win. And of course, the problem with breakthrough thinking is that it breaks things. And so in the case of Silicon Valley, of course, we see Facebook and some of the issues that it has with teen addiction to social media, but then there's all sorts of other issues that might arise, for example, with artificial intelligence and AGI. The next approach that most people think about in terms of innovation is through design thinking. Design thinking has been popularized by IDEO, and it too is from Silicon Valley. The idea there is that you focus on users' need. If you can empathize with the user, you can then develop solutions that will solve those users' needs. The problem, though, with design thinking is that it might solve a specific user's needs, but unfortunately it can also create unintended consequences. These unintended consequences are really massive sometimes in scale. For example, plastics may solve an immediate problem or a user's problem, but it also can create a systems problem. What we're advocating for today is to think about systems thinking. Systems thinking is based on the premise that everything in the world is connected. And I think there's very little argument that there is more connectivity today than ever before. And whether it's in digital technologies, or whether it's in the transportation of goods, or in supply chains, transportation of people, it's hard to deny the fact that we are more connected than we ever were before. That means that when there's a change in one part of the world, it ricochets across the rest of the world. And that is why we are seeing disruptions more and faster, bigger and deeper than we've ever seen before. And so we need a new way of thinking because the problems and the solutions are not small, but that they are systemic. And so we need a different type of solution. In systems thinking, it reflects today's realities. Unlike breakthrough thinking and design thinking, which are really meant to be in static, small-scale environments, systems thinking recognizes that we're part of a larger whole. And as a result, it builds adaptable and resilient design. As well, it contributes to better organizations communities, and ecosystems. And so if you can imagine that systems thinking becomes the benchmark for innovation in the future, that will mean that innovations into the future will create a better world for tomorrow. That is our hope. At Innovation North, we started 5 years ago to understand how we can bring systems innovation to life, systems thinking in the innovation process. It's a research practice initiative that involves a number of researchers from around the world, as well as practice partners that wanted to tackle how we would apply systems thinking to innovation. What we believed is that we could innovate for a better future, and these are some of our practice partners that we had at the close of the lab. And I really do want to acknowledge that Walmart is the practice partner that we're showcasing today. During the 5 years that the lab was together, we were innovating the innovation process, and we developed what we call as a compass. The compass integrates systems thinking with design thinking. There are various parts of the compass, and we'll be walking through it today. But there's a few points I really want to focus on at the moment. One is that the compass has always a North Star and a near star. These remain stable for the project, for the innovation that you're doing. And I'll tell you more about them in a minute, but the North Star is for the organization. The near star tackles the problem that you're doing. And then the four spaces on the compass imitate a design thinking, their problem, understanding the problem, building awareness around the problem, ideating, and actioning it. But they have differences that become quite important. In systems thinking, what we want to do is to iterate across the various spaces of the compass. In the remaining hour, we'll walk you through a little bit more of how to use the compass. If you go to the Innovation North website, what you will also see are worksheets, and we will be working through these worksheets for a very specific problem, like I said, that Walmart and other retailers face. If you go to the worksheets, what you'll see is the worksheets over here on the left. You'll see the example that Colt will be walking us through in the middle, and then a checklist to make sure that you're using the worksheets correctly. And these worksheets, the compass, can be applied to almost any organizational problem. So at this point, give it over to Colt, and he's going to describe the product returns challenge that most retailers face.
Great. Thanks, Tima. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to share back some of the really fun and important work that we had a chance to do as a practice partner with Innovation North a couple years ago. Which is a perfect segue to give a bit more background around what the challenge was as it relates to returns and Walmart Canada. We began this challenge and working with Innovation North, I'd say back in mid-2022. If you remember back all that time, I know time is a bit of a blur at this point, at least for me. That was at the height of online shopping. We were just coming out of another lockdown period. So the world was in a state of great upheaval. It was very different, even not only just for years prior, but even I'd say compared to today. And what we were seeing was a dramatic increase in product returns, not just Walmart Canada, but across the industry. Driven, of course, by many factors, but what those were, we weren't entirely sure. So it seemed like a ripe opportunity for us to apply some both design thinking and systems thinking lenses and do some innovating, so to speak. So in mid-2022, we began this journey. The way our team was structured at the time, I was part of a dedicated team focused on innovation within Walmart Canada. We actually had the luxury at the time of being solely focused on projects and work that had great strategic significance to our organization, where we got a chance to really dig into some of the bigger challenges that we were facing at the time, returns being a big component of that. However, our mandate also included and was primarily focused on improving customer experience. So this returns challenge fit nicely under that overarching category or heading, again, under customer experience. And that was of particular note because if you've been a customer of any retailer, returns are not always, or returning a product is not always the most enjoyable part of the shopping experience, so to speak. In fact, as we came to understand, it became that moment where you return a product actually became a moment of truth in a lot of ways, where our customers had good reason to judge us as a brand and as a retailer more generally regarding how we handled those returns. Not just, of course, from a customer experience point of view, but also, of course, from a broader systemic point of view, especially the impact it may or may not have on the ecosystem. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So just additionally, I should mention this was our whole team, the way this was structured, our whole team got a chance to focus on this pillar under our customer experience domain of what we could do and really what it meant to quote unquote solve returns for our organization. Now, I should mention up front that we have not solved returns, believe it or not. And I don't think, for that matter, any retailer has, because it remains a complex and in many ways wicked problem that is perfectly suited for a systems thinking lens. So I think those are the important things to mention. Just from a methodology point of view, I will also say, it's such a messy problem that using the compass that Innovation North provides and that we will walk through today was critical. It really gave us kind of a stepping stone and or a way to think through what would have otherwise been something we may or may not even know how to dig into fully. So I'll leave it at that as we get into those worksheets.
Colt, that was a fantastic introduction. I remember having that initial conversation about the question of product returns. It's a question that everybody understands because many of us, all of us, buy products. Most of us have experienced the return of products. What we didn't realize is how messy it really is. And I think that tackling this problem is something that I think everybody can relate to, but it also is a messier problem than what we first understand it to be. So Colt and I are going to have some fun in showing you what we're going to do with this. We're using a program called Miro. That's Miro. If you haven't used it, I strongly recommend that you try it. And that's where you'll find our worksheets as well. So I am now navigating to the worksheets. And what you've got here is the compass on the left and then the worksheets in yellow in the middle. Colt and I are going to go back and forth. And so this is really going to be an active process. I will talk to you about the philosophy of each space on the compass, and then Colt will illustrate it with a product returns example. So starting with the North Star and the near star, that would be the first worksheet here. The North Star, as I said earlier, anchors the purpose of the organization. So what is it that the organization, what is the purpose of the organization? And the near star is the ambitions for the project. So what is the intention? If the problem were solved, where would the project have gone? It's important to anchor on the North Star and near star and not lose sight, because innovations can easily lose their way. So as you come up with ideas and innovations, especially in the messy systems in which we often operate, it's really easy to start adding new products, new services, new ideas, and no longer know what the organization stands for. So the North and Near Star are critical in systems innovation. I'm going to scoot over then and show you the worksheet for product returns.
So thanks for that, Tima. And this was an important first exercise to walk through with our entire team, because it really did lay the groundwork for understanding what we were doing and why it was important. Here at Walmart, you'll hear it almost ad nauseum, but for good reason, that our mission and purpose is to help customers, and in this case, or Walmart Canada's case, to help Canadians save money so that they can live better. That is intentionally ambiguous because we want to at least allow for creativity, but with the interest, of course, of our customers being that guiding light. Now, for the project or the product returns challenge, as I mentioned, improving customer experience was really the starting point for us as to how we thought about returns and how we could further that overarching strategic goal to help Canadians save money and live better. However, as we'll go through, it became clear that although we really wanted to focus on customer experience, there were so many other actors and or systems at play that we needed to actually expand our understanding of what our near star was and what our goals were. For that matter, we actually looked at this as a bit of an iterative process in that we returned repeatedly throughout the subsequent stages to refine and to improve that near star so that we really had an accurate sense of where we were heading and what we were trying to achieve.
Terrific. Thanks, Colt. And then once you have the north and the near stars for your organization, so you have the north and the near stars for the challenge in front of you, then you want to look at the problem. A system's problem isn't just a single problem. It's often a problem for many actors within the system. And I think that that's what differentiates it from a design type orientation. In design thinking, we're often looking for the right problem. In fact, you might have heard this before, that apparently Einstein said that if you have 60 minutes to solve a problem, you need to spend 55 minutes defining the problem. Systems thinkers recognize that it's really hard to define a problem because different people see the problem from different angles. And so what we want to do is to recognize a vast array of possibilities and then identify a problem framing that is suitable for the moment, because you recognize that the problem may be reframed as you learn more about the system. So over to you, Colt, for the product returns.
That's exactly right. So just the idea of reframing, this was a really fun exercise for the team to go through. One of the reasons being we, as a kind of diverse team, really cared a lot about the greater impacts of something like product returns. So we spent a lot of time thinking through what those higher level systems looked like and why this was important. Society, planet, and the tax on the environment that anything that ends up in landfill can have was of great interest to us. So it was a great opportunity to, again, link what we were trying to do on the ground, so to speak, with our overarching values and goals, both as individuals and as an organization. Of course, just working from the top down, actually, I should say we approached it the opposite way. It was much easier for us to think through what the ground level, the organizational and team level systems problems were, or why returns were a particular problem at that level. So, of course, things along the lines of the fact that essentially any return made to a store requires an associate's attention, it requires physical labor, and it requires a process to be followed. All of that, as a finite resource in terms of time and attention, means time spent doing that rather than serving customers. So not only that, of course, the added workload that fluctuating volume of returns has to our associates also has an impact or should be considered. As well, of course, outside of just the social and psychological toll, there's the increased financial cost of all of these things. So returns in particular, I can't go into any details, of course, but has a significant financial impact for many retailers, Walmart Canada certainly being no exception to that. So those were the obvious ways in which we knew this was a problem within our organization. And I will also mention, we had spoken, or in the course of exploring this problem, we spoke with many teams across the business, everyone from store associates, those serving customers directly, throughout as well the head office where I am today in Mississauga, and had a chance to really understand from many different perspectives why this, how the problem was being handled and why it was a problem. And one thing that became very clear was that many people felt there was a bit of a disconnect in terms of why the problem was occurring and the impacts. So the gap between teams was becoming exacerbated, especially again, as in the midst of COVID, we were seeing higher than ever volumes of returns. Moving up, from a customer, of course, and competitor and supplier point of view, as I mentioned, we realized that a customer coming into the store was already, not happy with the product that they'd received. So perhaps on edge, so to speak, in that regard. But it was also at a moment where customers were worried about being judged, as it turns out. They were concerned that they'd be looked at by an associate or by anyone who had to handle their return as being dishonest. And so how an associate responded to the customer in front of them, how they handled a return like that really became a flashpoint potentially, or at least as I've called it again here, a moment of truth where we could either prove to the customer that we were a responsive, a friendly, and a brand that they would want to continue doing business with, or on the flip side, unfortunately, cause quite a bit of irritation and a lack, or basically push them towards a feeling of resentment, which of course we never want. And so it really meant that we had both a huge risk and a giant opportunity as well to address this in a way that improved customer experience. Moving up, I will, of course, just mention again, nobody here wants to contribute to the overarching problem of ecological degradation. We certainly have gone to great lengths over the past decade here at Walmart Canada to do about as much as we can at the moment for avoiding any products making their way to landfill. We have a series of different ways we handle return products, and I'm happy to say a very small portion of those actually end up in landfill. So again, can't go into too much detail there, but it is definitely an area of great interest to us as an organization, and certainly again to my small team at the time.
So it's really clear, Colt, that this product returns problem is a systems problem. So although it's very clear that it adds costs to Walmart or retailers in general, it's obviously causing an impact on customers as well as the planet and society.
Just quickly in that, because that's a great point. I think it's easy to kind of overlook the higher level systems and the impacts that our actions have on that. But again, going through this as an exercise, it was a fantastic opportunity for us to, again, link our decisions and our actions within the organization to how it interconnects on a higher level, not just, of course, to customers, but to the world at large. And as we'll go through, in systems thinking, you always end up looking at things from a causal or a looping perspective. So it all comes back to you in the end in a way. And this really brought that home.
Yeah, and what was really important to just reinforce here is that Walmart knew that they wanted to reduce product returns, and whatever the ambition was, but let's say 2%, reduce them by 2% over 5 years, is an example of a possibility, but then recognizing that they aren't where they want to be right now, which is a problem itself. So then as we start to say, okay, now we know where we want to be, we know that we're not there, what do we do about it? The first thing that a systems thinker will do then is to build awareness of the system. And in building awareness of the system, I think it's critical that we understand the broader system in which we're sitting. It's very typical for us just to look at the things that are nearby, the things that we know, talk to the people that we know. In systems thinking, what we ask is that you not only talk to the people that you know, talk to the people with power, talk to the people with money, but also talk to the people that are often invisible, because those are the people that are often the source of sometimes the most innovative thinking. So in building awareness, what we want to do is just to identify the key actors and activities within the system. And so just drawing a simple map of the key actors, who they are, just put them on the page, connect the boxes so you know how the actors and activities are connected, and then identify frictions. Why aren't, in this case, product returns moving as quickly as they are? Why are they so high? And so in the first stage, what we want to do is to just put everything on a piece of paper. But then we get really complex and it becomes overwhelming. This is normal. What we want to do then is to take the next step and to simplify the map. So we go to building complexity and then reducing it. And you go to as simple as possible within the awareness building space. So in the case of product returns, this is where we started. This is where we started, and this is the simplified map. And Colt, I believe that you want me to scoot over to the right.
Yeah, so
Is
I
that
just want to point out two things. Number one, and not specifically on this per se, but just the points you raised, Tima, are extremely salient in that throughout the process of exploring the problem, like you mentioned, it's often those without a voice or who are most even impacted on the ground level to be overlooked. That was very much the case, or potentially the case for product returns. Meaning we ended up, although focused on our customer, of course, spending a lot of time thinking through the associate experience as well, because it's our associates who were really, again, on the front lines and handling product returns and had the opportunity and the risk of having a negative experience themselves, but also the opportunity to really make decisions that had an impact down the line and affect basically not only the structure of the system, but the behavior of the system as well. So we, again, to your point, really ended up realizing we needed to spend more time looking at that level of system actor to even begin to think through how we would design an effective solution. Also, to your point, in terms of creating greater clarity through simplicity, if you don't mind scrolling over to the right now, as any systems thinker will tell you, like to try to think in terms of loops and more specifically story loops, as they call them, or systems archetypes. This is an attempt to use stories that you see repeatedly throughout various systems to quickly ascertain what's happening and what those dynamics are. So here's an example of one that I would say is a fair representation of what we uncovered, where we have what are called two reinforcing or nested reinforcing loops, which become a vicious cycle, meaning they exacerbate themselves just by each step of the process happening. I'll just walk through it quickly by pointing out, you'll see at the top our volume of returns within that inner loop, which in itself increases the likelihood that a customer, as those returns increase, there more and more customers will come into store to return items. This increases the likelihood that there will be an unpleasant interaction between customer and associate. That in turn can over time erode customers' trust in our brand. And that in itself will also exacerbate the problem, increasing the likelihood that items will be returned. Meanwhile, the lack of trust in our brand can also, of course, negatively impact sales. With that, our leadership and anyone trying to run a successful business will notice that and want or feel the need to do something. Of course, we are a retailer, and as a business, we have an objective to meet sales. And so anything that we need to adjust is taken under consideration, which means that we may or may not see a change to operational conditions. In other words, or for example, more or less assortment and or stock being added to stores, which come with added responsibilities for associates. Those kinds of changes or increases lead to associates' sense of capability or overwhelm, either degrading or increasing, meaning they feel less like they have less bandwidth to handle whatever gets additional needs they have in terms of what deserves their attention, which in and of itself can increase the likelihood of an unpleasant customer and associate interaction. Now, this is meant to be illustrative. I will say I couldn't go into too much specific detail, but I think this holds generally true for any retailer and certainly was reflective of what we uncovered throughout our exploration of the problem. Now, the only other thing I want to mention is the loop to the right. So Tima, if you don't mind just scrolling over. In addition to a vicious cycle, we also started to feel like, and again, I think this is generally true, The response to the growing volume of returns required a fix that essentially was unsustainable. In other words, it was a fix that backfired. This is another story loop that you'll see referenced a lot. So just quickly, we have a stock of volume of returns. So in total, how many or how few returns we have over, say, a month or a year. As the organization dedicates extra time and resources, that actually decreases the volume of returns because those are being processed, sent off, handled in different ways. But what happens is that we actually operationally become reliant on stores and associates to make what are unsustainable efforts at handling that level of returns, which of course then can lead to a reinforcing loop below that, where associates are distracted, again, torn away from being able to provide adequate customer support, which in itself can lead to customers being unable to either find or learn about products that they would need to in order to make an informed purchase decision. And with the wrong product going to customers if for the wrong use case, we end up seeing a greater increase or an increase in returns in general, which adds to that volume of returns stock. So you can see how the dynamics aren't maybe as straightforward, or that it's certainly not a linear process per se. It's very much a looping and self-reinforcing, in many instances, cycle.
Well, that's incredible because it just goes to show how a simple problem can really escalate to being one that starts to overwhelm the business.
Yeah.
And I think the feedback loops that you've just described here illustrate that really well. As simple as that is, I think we all intuit it. We understand it intuitively that this could happen, but then we still don't know what to do about it. So now that we understand the problem, and what I love about what you just said too, Colt, is the notion that the associates become really central in this. If you had taken a design thinking approach, you would have focused on the customer experience. And what you're saying is actually the associate experience that might be really critical in the success or failure of dealing with product returns.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's move then to the ideas space. The ideas space is very similar to design thinking, so we don't depart a lot from that. And so I'll make this relatively quick, but what we want to do is just brainstorm. You want to have really a range of ideas from people who know a little bit about the problem, maybe people who have even had experience in various ways of the problem. Just generate a bunch of stickies in a workshop, or just collect ideas as you go along and learn about the system. As you brainstorm the ideas, we find it also helpful at some point, once you reach saturation, to identify the ideas that are most exciting to you. So we filter them by adding dots, not by removing stickies, by adding dots to those that are the most exciting. Once we have the most exciting ideas, we cluster them. And because some of the ideas are so similar, so by clustering ideas, then we have a sense of what the organization can do. So we're going to illustrate that with product returns.
Yeah. So these are just full disclosure. I couldn't add too much detail here from specifics around what we ended up doing from a brainstorming and initiative point of view. These are great examples, though, of what I think would be very logical and, in many cases, creative solutions to the overall problem of returns. The dot voting is, in terms of methodology, I will say we certainly followed this pretty closely, both through brainstorming and through dot voting, to gain consensus on which of the projects we'd want to advance and put a bit more investment and time and resources into. Because keep in mind, the point of design thinking and innovation in general is, at least at an early stage, not to filter out ideas. Rather, it's to come up with as many ideas as you can, so that you get as many creative ideas and perspectives out there. Only once that's the case, then do you converge, rather, where you then choose specifically what again, you want to spend the time and resources trying to test, which was our next step. So what I can say, or actually, I guess it's the next worksheet, so I won't go into it right yet.
And just to illustrate on this one, this is just once again illustrative. It's not what Walmart did, but what you could do then is to cluster the stickies, give them labels, and those labels then become the action plan that we will move to next. And so as we go back to the worksheets, in the action plan for our systems action plan, what we recognize is that you cannot have a silver bullet. There's no one action that will solve a systems problem. What you need is an ecology of actions, actions that work together. But not only do you need an ecology of actions, you need to sequence them in ways that make sense. So you think about the big actions, the distant future. That's the ones that you can't do now. But then there's ones that you can do that are simpler, and you do them sooner. If you act on the simpler ones first, it will then start to shape what happens into the distant future. So the idea is to take the clusters that you had in the ideas worksheet, post them in terms of timing into the actions worksheet. Once you have the ideas that you're going to work on now, that you can work on soon, you then can determine the ideas cluster, that's what you're working on now, who does what, by when, and with whom. And you start building an action plan. And like I said, in a systems approach, you just work on what you can work on now, but recognizing that you have distant actions that you want to do later. Over to you, Colt.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it is, I think it can't be said enough that it can be really exciting for teams to come up with a million different ideas, but realistically, only so many can be actioned or implemented. And ideally, again, we find ways to break those down into more bite-sized pieces. So we thought in terms of what we wanted to test out first, we absolutely thought about everything from the point of view of the customer. We spent a lot of time thinking about the associate and what levers we had to pull there from a solution point of view. But we really tried to think critically and get feedback from our leadership as well as to what they felt was feasible. This was a great opportunity to bring the broader organization into the discussion and to also get feedback and make it a collaborative process that way, so that we secured buy-in and really understood from leadership's point of view what was feasible and what would be worth our time and further investment. So it can be a really useful tool in that sense as well. If you don't mind scrolling to the right, I can at least share a little bit because this is very similar to a few of the clusters that we explored just through researching the problem, where in the accurate information category, we did run an experiment where we worked with more than a dozen customers, offered them the opportunity to build their own label. In other words, what information would you want to see if you could design any sort of label for a product that you would see at one of our stores? That was an interesting opportunity to try to gauge and to get in the minds of our customers to help ensure we were providing them with all the information they needed to make an accurate purchase decision. Again, with the systems map in mind, because we knew that would be kind of at the front end of the process, to help prevent the influx of potential products that would be likely to be returned. So moving through though that cycle, we instead of restocking per se, we actually thought about, well, are there other models that we could maybe test out or at least explore where there was a lower level of commitment required from customers, and or on the flip side where we made clear this item, maybe the return policy is slightly different. Now, I will say none of these things we moved forward with, but we at least played around with these as an idea because we had the luxury of that being part of our mandate at the time. So yeah, the last thing I will mention is again returning to customers themselves. This was a great opportunity to kind of delve into the behavioral economics or the retail psychology behind purchasing product at one of our stores. So we ended up working with customers, again, close to 15, where we walked them through an exercise on a Miro board. We asked them to outline when in the shopping process they felt a sense of ownership of the product. Because what we realized in going through this was that uh, when people start to associate something that they've purchased as their own, that the impetus to return it seemingly drops off significantly. It's not a linear change. It's a pretty significant change in terms of whether or not it's something they want to return. Of course, it differs from product to product, and of course, customer to customer. But it was a really, really neat opportunity to really, again, try to get into the heads of our customers as well as associates. And I guess just to mention, like I keep harping on, we spent a lot of time talking to associates about how they would regulate returns rather than it being a top-down centralized policy, which is not something, of course, we moved forward with, but was another great opportunity for us to understand from that frontline perspective what they thought was fair, what they thought was reasonable, and why. So all of that really, again, fed back into our overarching understanding, our overarching and or near-term goal, rather star, our near star in terms of what we were trying to achieve. And really, again, hopefully setting realistic objectives in terms of achieving that. So yeah, it was a really, really fascinating process. And this was such a helpful set of tools that we were able to draw on. Of course, being a practice partner and having the privilege of working with Tima and the whole Innovation North team throughout this, I had the great luxury of being able to learn more and more about systems thinking throughout that, and then bring that back to my team as we worked through this. So talk about a reinforcing loop. It was a really good, really personally satisfying opportunity for me to deepen my understanding of a really significant problem, as well as just a professional and personal interest of mine. I'm a big advocate of systems thinking now. So I'll leave it at that.
Cool. That was fantastic. And I really do appreciate the endorsement. But I have to say, too, that we learned a lot from your experiences as well. So I think that the learning was mutual. And I want to reinforce a couple of points that you made. One is that these were a lot of experiments that you tried. So it's not that you knew that what the answer was. And I think that the other thing about a system is that we can't know everything about the system. And so there are usually little prods and probes and experiments and nudges that will help you learn more, and then you don't make these massive failures. And so the investments can be actually smaller with potentially bigger results as well. And the second thing I think was really salient in the explanation that you gave was also an opportunity to build better relationships with your associates, because a lot of the ideas came from the bottom up. They had to be implemented too by the associates. And so they really became part of the team. So I think a systems lens also fosters this orientation to building just a better employee system, a better associate system.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. That's absolutely the case.
I want to just then return back and maybe summarize and give some room for questions as well. But the one thing that I think it's important to reinforce is, although the worksheets look like they're linear here, and we walk them through in a linear way, they're actually really iterative. So as one learns more about the system, they build awareness. They sometimes want to redefine the problem because they've learned that the problem isn't what they think it is. We did a project, for example, on climate change in the agricultural industry, and farmers, we realized, care about climate change, but what's most on their mind was soil health. And so we recognized that the problem was less about climate change for them and more about soil health, and yet the two are deeply related. And so keeping yourself open to reframing the problem, for learning more about the system, as you nudge and learn about the system, act on the system is really important. So the compass is really meant for the four spaces to be iterative. And like I said at the outset, the North Star, the organizational star, and the near star, where you want the project to go, remain pretty much stable throughout the project. And I think that's all I needed to say in summary of this. Colt, did you want to add anything?
Um, Not much. I think that sums it up quite nicely. I guess the one thing I will say, having been somebody who had the opportunity to implement these tools, just generally speaking, a systems thinking lens can be a big challenge and it requires a bit of adjustment for anyone who's maybe just learning how to use them, myself included. But the essentially agility and or flexibility in terms of thinking that it requires, although difficult up front, becomes more intuitive as you go. And so I just want to offer a degree of encouragement to anyone who's interested, but feels like this is totally unintuitive or outside of their realm of understanding. It really truly just takes practice and thinking through everything that you see in front of you from a systems point of view to really start to wrap your mind around it. But boy, is it worth it because, once you start seeing system and or causal loops, you'll see them everywhere. So I would just encourage myself and anyone else, of course, interested, keep at it. And certainly using tools like this where there is a guided methodology, I think is a critical first step to not only using these tools, but to actually applying them in a way that advances your team and your organization's goals. So highly, highly recommend it.
Thanks, Colt.
Absolutely. But that's all I have.
So in terms of questions, I see one question from Jim Rahman, who asks, where can we find the foundational ideas underlying your work? Jay Forster Systems Dynamic Work and others. Jay Forster, of course, was a professor at MIT, and we lean heavily on those ideas. Certainly your causal loop maps that you showed for product returns, Colt was building on that type of work, that type of thinking. But if you go to www.innovationnorth.ca, Jim, you'll be able to get these worksheets. They're free. And then you'll also see the product returns example as well. So Norris Kara asks, is this similar to root cause analysis? It's a tool used in environmental management systems. Norris, it's a really great question. And I think that the answer might be more complicated than you need to, or that you may care about right now. But there's two different approaches to systems thinking. One is systems dynamics, and that is Jay Forster's, MIT's approach. It's a systems science orientation, so life cycle analysis is very indicative of that orientation. And so what one does is map the system as detailed as possible and then work through systematically where, let's say, material flows would be or where carbon impacts are. And then in doing that, they can figure out where the root causes are for, let's say, carbon emissions. Systems thinking, on the other hand, is far more intuitive. And so we don't look for precision, but recognizing the general flows. If we understand generally what the system does, it's exactly what we need to do to inspire innovation, to inspire ideas. And I think that's where we want to get to because systems science, which is important, but also very laborious. And I don't think that we can move with that. We can move that slowly. Also, the systems thinking approach is that we keep on nudging the system forward. So once we learn something about the system, we act on it. As we act on it, we learn more about the system. And then we act again. And you've, I'm sure, seen flocks of starlings, murmurs of starlings, and you know that they keep moving. And in moving, they learn where food sources may be. And so it's that constant movement that becomes really important for systems thinking to work. So a systems thinking approach is not about plan, do, check, act, and analyze. It's very much about action and learning. Colt, did you want to add to that at all?
Uh, Maybe just to say that I think, especially if you look at other examples of system archetypes or story loops, they do try, some do at least try to incorporate what you might call a root cause into them. However, as you mentioned, Tima, I think the answer is that it's quite a bit more complicated than just a single root cause per se, and that each element of a system plays a role. And so although we may have identified a root cause to some of the issues, the other actors or elements in the system also deserve quite a bit of attention, or at least I think that's what systems thinking lens advocates. So I'm a big fan of, as a former naturopathic doctor, the whole philosophy was treat the root cause. So I'm a big fan of the idea that we could address a root cause of a problem or issue. But of course, although you might have identified that, the number of things that get in the way that you can't necessarily address just by looking at that one thing, I think deserve systems lens for that reason alone. So not to ramble on, but I think, yeah, systems thinking gives you that opportunity to embed that idea of a root cause in a larger picture or context.
Here's the next question is actually directed at you, Colt. It
Oh.
asks, how long did the systems thinking exercises with Walmart take? Depending on the time frame, was there buy-in from senior leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for our instance, or in the way we used it, we spent a good, I'd say, 3 to 6 months, just kind of working with and, not only mapping out the system, but of course, progressing through each stage of the Innovation North methodology. Meanwhile, of course, like I mentioned, we ran experiments in between. So in total, around that 6 month to 10 month mark. And it as well presenting throughout back to leadership to get buy-in and to get alignment in terms of what we thought was worth investing further in, and also to just corroborate our own understanding of the problem. One thing I guess this brings to mind is, and I forgot to mention, is the importance of bringing a wide array of perspectives into the room, not only, of course, for ideas, because that's where you're going to get the richest set of ideas, but also as a means to start mapping out the boundaries of the system. As we learned with associates, if we hadn't spoken to that team or that set of actors, we wouldn't have realized that that was a critical component of the system we were trying to intervene within. So I think depending on how long you want to take, as long as it takes basically to get a full representation of all those actors within the system, which you can do very quickly, or it can stretch out for years in some instances. So a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but for us, it took between 6 to 10 months.
Thanks, Colt. One more question from Gerald Radke. He says, I've applied various processes around the subject area, systems thinking, complex decision analysis, etc. One of the challenges is bringing people around to embracing these processes. Many people think linearly and in black and white. Thoughts? And I think that there's no question, Gerald, that we think linearly and in black and white. And I think that that's a consequence of our educational system, and that we are often looking for a single problem and a single answer to that problem. And that answer gives us some sort of comfort that we will get to the place that we want to get to, but the answers are often the wrong answers. So yes, people think linearly because we want certainty in our life. Systems thinking does not necessarily give certainty, but I think that there is a degree of appreciation, and I would even suggest that most people embrace this idea of systems thinking once they know it, but they just don't know how to get over the complexity. So it's not that people are resistant to systems thinking, they just don't know what to do about it because the complexity seems to overwhelm their ability to understand the system, and so then they reduce it again to a very simple process. So how do you get people to move beyond that? I think it's in a process like this, and the whole idea of the compass was intentionally saying this is very approachable, and we can, through some basic worksheets, show you how to think in systems and work systematically in applying systems thinking. Anything to add to that, Colt?
I think you said it well, and you certainly know much more and/or can speak to it better. I guess the only thing I would say in terms of I mean, the questioner, sorry, I can't remember your name, hit the nail on the head though in terms of the need to think non-linearly is really almost the fundamental or foundational tenet of systems thinking is to challenge linear thinking. And so I think, it is counterintuitive in many ways for us to realize that things don't progress from A to B and stop there. In fact, in reality and in systems, things loop and or feed into one another. So all that is to say, yeah, it's a challenge, and it does take almost a paradigmatic shift, or at least a major reframing mentally in terms of mental models of how the world works. But again, I see causal loops everywhere now. So please join me. I think it's worth it. But yeah, that's all.
We have just one more question, but I feel we also need to wrap up. Jim Ramahan has asked, is Thinking in Systems, Donella Meadows' book, still a go-to book on this? And the answer is absolutely. I also like Peter Senge's Fifth Discipline, which is also from the 1990s. Any of your favorite books, Colt?
Well, I mean, truthfully, you've hit the two of them right there. In fact, I've coming in today was listening to both of those, Donella Meadows' book for the fifth time now, and Fifth Discipline now for the third time. The Fifth Discipline also has a really good field book, which goes into detail about how to apply systems thinking. So that would be another one I'd strongly recommend. Those are really the two keys, though. But yeah, those are definitely still the go-tos.
I'm going to wrap up. I just want to wrap up on just one note, and then I'm going to move it back to Sean to close. I wanted to say that if you are interested in applying systems thinking to a specific problem, I encourage you to look into the Ivey Academy certificate, and you'll get to work with a mentor through the worksheets. If you have a specific corporate challenge you wanted to undertake, then by all means, reach out to me. My email address is there on the screen, tbansal@ivey.ca. And we are also starting shortly a working group to deal with Scope 3 emissions. It will be about 10 to 15 corporations in Canada that are committed to tackling Scope 3 emissions, and they will learn from each other and apply systems thinking in moving and advancing their reduction of Scope 3 emissions. Over to you, Sean.
To everyone tuned in, we appreciate you spending some time with us. If you're interested in learning more about Innovation North, visit innovationnorth.ca or follow Innovation North on social media. Again, thank you to our guests, Tima Bansal and Colton Schwenk. We look forward to seeing you next time.